Hello, welcome to Business News. I am Frank Omalapi, and here are some of the reports we'll file in now. It's no longer news that President Muhammadu Buhari has signed into law the Petroleum Industry Bill. But what is now news is the reactions the law is beginning to generate and how it will impact the economy, especially the people in the oil-producing communities. There is the argument for and against whether the 3% allocation for the host communities is enough or not. To give us better perspective to these issues, an economic watcher, Mr. YUSUF, joins me now. He's the immediate past Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's begin. I know that there are expectations are quite high as regards this bill that has just been signed into law. Let's begin from there. What are your expectations so far?
Well, first, let me say that there is no perfect legislation. I know there have been issues, from quite a number of stakeholders as regard whether the president should have signed it or not. But let me say that there's no perfect legislation. You can always improve on situations. In terms of expectations, one of the biggest challenges that the sector has faced, I'm talking about the oil and gas sector, is the uncertainty around the legislative framework. And that has significantly slowed down the level of investment, because it is difficult to invest in an environment of uncertainty. We have been on this PIB story for close to 15 years. Now we have got it signed. It may not be perfect, but it has brought some clarity into the regulatory space. So that will scale up the level of confidence, because the uncertainty has reduced, and we expect a lot more investment to now come into that space. The upstream, the downstream, the midstream, and all of that. So the expectation is that we are likely to see a lot more investment because of the fact that the degree of uncertainty in the sector has reduced, and some of the provisions are also very positive. They are likely to impact positively on investment or investors' sentiment around the oil and gas sector. So to that extent, I think it will impact the economy very positively.
You're talking about investment, and you also look at, especially in the downstream sector of the petroleum industry, a lot of people expect that more liberal decisions should be made as regard the value chain and all of that. Do you think that this law will make any difference in that? Because over the years, even though we've had a lot of policies come up and issues come up or discussions come up, but we've not really had, that policy, some of those policies have not really had impact in the downstream sector.
Well, the Petroleum Industry Act, as we should call it now, is a very comprehensive piece of legislation. It's very robust, and it covered practically all aspects of the industry. Whether you are talking about the upstream, which is about production,
right,
the midstream, the downstream, and all of that, and of course the host community. And of course, you know that the Act focuses first on the governance framework for the oil and gas sector. Right. It focuses on the fiscal terms, which are the conditions, the commercial considerations that investors look at, to assess whether this investment in the sector is profitable or not. And of course, the third major component is the host community provisions that are there. Concerning the value chain or the broad spectrum of the industry, it covers everything. The downstream, of course, is covered. All the issues of the regulation, liberalization, all of these elements are covered in this legislation. But, for some aspects of the law, implementation may pose some challenges, especially when we begin to factor in the issues of what we call political economy. And a lot of that comes into play in the downstream sector. Recently, we heard the president, when he was talking about issue of subsidy or no subsidy and all of that.
Right.
It wasn't coming across as though the government was committed to the deregulation of the downstream. Whereas the PIB is a completely different thing.
There are key issues I want us to look at, which is the issue of the subsidy you talked about, you just made mention of now, and of course the issue of the host communities. Of course, there have been an argument about that now. But let's talk about the investment which you say this law will attract into the economy. Do you think that the NNPC, as it were, the government agency as it is, will still be playing the big brother as it were in the sector, given the fact that you've said this bill will throw up the sector for investment?
No. You see, the governance component of the legislation has structured the NNPC in a way, first, that is going to be a purely commercial entity. Secondly, we are not likely to see the kind of political and bureaucratic interference that have been seen. So it's going to function more like a purely business entity, which is what we need in that sector. Because what you have currently is like a quasi-government institution. Of course, they play a lot of role in the area of investment, but there are still this element of bureaucracy, political interference, in appointments, in process, and all of that. So this bill, I mean, this act will reduce all of that. So we expect a more effective and a smarter governance framework from the NNPC. And it's not going to have that kind of overbearing influence that it used to have. So that in the area of governance, I think that is okay. Then in the area of all the investment provisions, I think they are a lot much clearer now for investors, because one of the challenges of investment is confidence. And one of the key pillars of confidence is clarity of legislation. And it's also about the quality of the regulatory framework. If you have a regulatory framework that has too much of government content in it, it has a way of creating problems for investors. So this act, I think, has done away to a large extent with that element of it. So we are likely to see a much more commercially focused NNPC. We are likely to see a lot more business-friendly environment, investment-friendly environment, from both the regulatory framework and from also the general policy perspective. And we're also likely to see a lot more liberalization in the sector, particularly in the downstream, because you still have a whole lot of issues around the downstream. But whether we have the political will to follow through on the reforms that this act is putting on the table across all the levels of the industry is a different matter. Because as we speak, you have quite a lot of people who have vested interests. We have a lot of people who are benefiting from the status quo. And we know that up until now, the oil and gas sector, particularly from the NNPC perspective, is one big platform for patronage. You know, all of these things are likely to go away.
All right.
And we are likely to see some resistance, reluctance, but the good thing is that we now have an act to work with.
That's right. That brings us to the issue of the subsidy controversy, whether it's still being paid for. The other time, in a moment, the government will come up and say, look, we've taken subsidy away. And then in another step or in another statement, and then the subsidy is back. What difference do you think this law or this PIB that has been signed into law will make as regard some of those controversies we're having around subsidy?
Well, the controversy around subsidy, subsidy varies with oil price. That is why at the time we said there was no subsidy. There was no subsidy at that time in truth, because oil price has reduced, cost of importation reduced, and the pump price was able to cover the cost. So at that time, there was no subsidy. But the moment we had an increase in oil price, cost of importation increased, the price remained the same, therefore the subsidy began to grow. So that is what is causing all this volatility, all these swings in subsidy. Today there is subsidy, tomorrow there is no subsidy. But having said that, this legislation or this act is also proposing an entire reform of the downstream. We have been debating this issue of deregulation here and there. This act is also saying that we should have a liberalized downstream sector, a deregulated downstream sector.
Right.
If you continue to insist on the subsidy regime, then we'll be working against the spirit of this act.
Does this therefore mean that we are likely to expect, since of course this will bring about total deregulation, as it were, does this therefore mean that we should expect price differentiation in terms, since more investors are beginning to come in?
Well, price differentiation in pump price?
In pump price.
Of course there will be, because if you have a completely deregulated system, there will be competition among the players, and competition can come in different forms. You can have price competition, you can have competition in the area of quality. So depending on the business models of each of the investors, of each of the players, that is what is going to reflect on the price of their products.
There is a link between price differentiation, the prices of, competition and all of that, as regards the issue of inflation, because once the prices goes up, and then you expect inflation and prices of commodities in the market. So how do you think this will impact the ordinary Nigerian?
No, it depends. It depends on the efficiency of the processes.
Right.
And it depends on how well this act is also able to attract a lot more investment into the downstream sector. Because we are having these volatilities in price because there is no investment in downstream. Because the refineries have collapsed. Because there is no private sector investment that can actually produce locally and insulate or shield the economy from the volatilities of oil price and the volatilities of the exchange rate. That is where the problem is coming from. But if the legislation or this act as we have it now creates the environment which I expect it to be for more investors to come into the downstream, for a lot more people to invest in the refineries, all these volatilities will reduce. And the moment those reduces, the impact that people fear about the regulation leading to inflation, all those things will reduce. But it will take time. Because when you are talking about investment in refineries, local production, those things will take time.
Right.
So we expect to see something like a transition period. These things will not happen immediately because we are talking of major investments here. So it will take time for some of these results, some of these outcomes to begin.
How much
to
time
manifest.
do we think we should?
We should be looking at a year or two because decisions have to be taken. Major decisions for that matter.
Okay,
resources have to be mobilized.
Because of our time, let's look at the oil producing region, of course, which has a 3% allocation to the host communities. I mean, there have been arguments and reactions whether this should be or not, or some say it's too small. And how do you react?
Well, I think we need to give this policy a chance. First of all, we have gone past the stage of debating the act. The act has been signed into law. Let us focus on how to make it work and how to get the best value from the act. Now, coming to the issue of as to whether the 3% is enough or not, 100% of zero is zero. So if they give you the entire 100% and nothing is happening in the place, you are not getting anything. Whereas 10% of, say, 100 billion, for instance, that is 10 billion. So the focus should be on creating the environment to ensure that we have a lot more investment in that space. That is the spirit that we should be focusing on. If you have 3% of operating expenses, not profit, I will create an environment where we have a lot more investment. 3% is a lot of money. From some of the estimates that have been made, I mean, they are talking about $500 million annually. That's a lot of money. Just do the conversion. And it could even be much more if you create the environment for the investment to grow. So we'll be looking at a policy and environment that will enable the growth of investment. As investments grow, the 3% in nominal terms will also be growing. That is what is important. And in any case, what is key in all of this is accountability, is the fact that government has also done quite a lot before now. We had the Ministry of Niger Delta, we have the NNDC, we have the amnesty program, We have the derivation fund on the derivation on oil produce. You know, there are quite a lot that is already even happening. On top of that, we are having this 3%. I think we should work with what we have. We should encourage the growth of investment. And if we do that, a lot more money will come in. We should be focusing more on growing the investment than focusing on percentage. If you have a big percentage and the total investment is small, you don't benefit much.
Just before I let you go, I mean, yes, 3%, there's been an argument whether it's too small. I mean, you have said that we should start from there. But again, the question would be whether this will cushion the or impact or result in calming the agitations and all of those agitations, demands in the Niger Delta region.
I think with proper engagement, it should calm them, and with proper understanding. The issue is not the percentage. The issue is the quantum of investment. That is what will make the difference. And we should also demand accountability from even the existing structures that you have on ground. Accountability on the derivation fund. Accountability from NDDC. Accountability on the amnesty program, which is also in the budget every year. Accountability from the Ministry of Niger Delta. All of these things are put in place primarily because of the environmental impact of oil production. So the primary consideration should be oil producing communities across all these programs.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Lots of issues to talk about, but we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. MUDA YUSUF is the immediate past Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, then that's all we have time for on business news at this hour. Many thanks for watching. I'm Frank Komalape. It's back to you now.